Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
And it pains me to say this. Donald John Trump has had probably the best 24 hours that he has had while president of the United States. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. Annual inflation, 2.3% in the month of April, way less than expected. Donald Trump announced a China tariff deal, although the devil's in the details. It's important to point out that one of the things that this president has become, I think, known for, outside of his bubble anyway, his fan base, he likes to create a problem and then solve the problem he created and tout the results of his problem solving. That's a lot of the China tariff situation. And when you have Republican stalwarts like, and I think he's running for president, y'all, go ahead and prepare for that. And the hair. Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. I believe in my heart of hearts, Rand Paul is setting himself up to be that clarion beacon voice of libertarianism and conservatism all wrapped into one, the anti-MAGA. I believe Rand Paul. Just go ahead and write that down. If you have not heard that from anybody else, remember your old buddy Ron said this. I think Rand Paul is running for president in 2028. And all the bluster from Steve Bannon about, Trump's going to run for a third term and he's going to win. Okay, there are going to, that's, go ahead and write that line down, because that's going to be, if that's going to happen, if President Trump is going to try and make a third run at this, and Steve Bannon insists that he will and insists that he'll win, the first thing he's got to get through, Rand Paul. I just firmly believe this. Rand Paul has been sour on the president getting a $400 million airplane from Qatar, the Trojan horse with wheels. He has been sour on cable television about the tariff deal. I think Rand Paul's running against him, or running for president, if that's not what Donald Trump is allowed to do, because the Constitution does have a pretty clear. Anyway, Donald Trump has had, I think, probably the best 24 hours of his presidency. And who knows, maybe polling will show that out in the coming days or weeks. I don't know. Here's what I do know. The president held a press conference to announce he was slashing drug prices. Sorta. He's putting it on pharmaceuticals to lower their drug prices in the United States and giving them 30 days to do it, or else. And that's where the devil's in the details. Where do we start? Do we start there? Yeah, let's do that. Let's go there. Associated Press. President Donald Trump Monday signed a sweeping executive order setting a 30-day deadline. Boy, he's all about these deadlines. China, now we have a 90-day deadline. Anyway, 30-day deadline for drug makers to electively lower the cost of prescription drug prices in the U.S. or face new limits down the road over what the government will pay. That's like Medicare, Medicaid, VA, drug price negotiating. I believe we tackled that last presidency. We opened the door for that last presidency. Anyway, the order calls on the health department, led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to broker new price tags for drugs over the next month. If deals are not reached, Kennedy will be tasked with developing a new rule that ties the price the U.S. pays for medications to lower prices paid by other countries. And let's just, I'm going to give you the audio from The Daily Show because it's funniest. On this press conference where Donald Trump tells us that he's created the word equalize.
How is this going to work?
The rest of the world's going to have to pay a little bit more, and America's going to pay a lot less. Basically, what we're doing is equalizing. There's a new word that I came up with, which I think is probably the best word. We're going to equalize.
Out comes the dictionary.
Europe, Eureka,
Go back.
Euclid.
Go back. It's
Yeah,
QU.
here it is. Equalize. I thought it sounded familiar. Look. He's trying to kill us all.
Oh, man.
Look, I would like to think that the tenacious pleadings of progressive leaders like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders helped make this possible.
We are sick and tired of paying by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs.
I'm going to attack the prices on commonly used drugs. Put a cap on the cost of insulin, a cap on the cost of prescription drugs.
Unfortunately, it turns out credit for the biggest, most important announcement in the history of this presidency goes to someone else.
I mean, I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine who's a businessman, very, very, very top guy. Most of you would have heard of him. A highly neurotic, brilliant businessman, seriously overweight.
And while, listen, I encourage you to watch that segment. I'm going to give it to you in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. While it's seriously funny, he goes on to talk about how his neurotic, successful, fat friend was looking for Ozempic, I guess, in London and found out it was way cheaper in London than it is in the United States. Well, yes, that's how it's been and how it's been for a long time. You heard the voice of Bernie Sanders, and Bernie actually released a statement after this announcement that I'll read to you right now. The statement starts out, Bernie Sanders, ranking member of the Senate Subcommittee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, today released the following statement regarding President Trump's executive order from this morning, which claims it will slash drug costs by tying the prices of some medicine in the U.S. to the significantly lower ones abroad. He said, I agree. No, I'm not going to do Bernie's voice. I agree with President Trump. It is an outrage that the American people pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. It is beyond unacceptable that we pay, in some cases, 10 times more for the same exact prescription drugs that people in other major countries. But let's be clear. The problem is not that the price of prescription drugs is too low in Europe and Canada. The problem is that the extraordinarily greedy pharmaceutical industry made over $100 billion in profits last year by ripping off the American people, he writes. Okay, you got your popcorn? Because this is the best part. Further, as Trump well knows, his executive order will be thrown out by the courts. If Trump is serious about making real change rather than just issuing a press release, he will support legislation I will soon be introducing to make sure we pay no more for prescription drugs than people in other major countries. That's right. Bernie Sanders is going to introduce legislation that surely President Donald Trump will back to do the same thing, right? Sanders finishes, if Republicans and Democrats come together on this legislation, we can get it passed in a few weeks. Yeah, the devil's in the details. Sanders is right. That executive order will be tossed because we don't live in a communist country where you can just tell businesses, no, you can't charge that. That's not free market capitalism, right? From the Associated Press again, it's unclear what, if any, impact the Republican president's executive order will have on millions of Americans who have private health insurance. The federal government has the most power to shape the price it pays for drugs covered by Medicare and Medicaid. That's right, the price it pays for drugs covered by Medicare and Medicaid. Trump's promised new but uncertain savings on drug prices just hours after the Republican-led House released its new plan to trim $880 billion from Medicaid. They've been warning us about that on the left. The right's been saying, no. $880 billion is essentially all the budget for Medicaid. Back to the AP. Taxpayers spend hundreds of billions of dollars on prescription drugs, injectables, transfusions, and other medications every year through Medicare, which covers nearly 70 million older Americans. Medicaid, which provides nearly free health care for almost 80 million poor and disabled people in the U.S. You add them up, that's about half the population. also spends tens of billions of dollars each year for drugs. You know the pharmaceutical companies had to chime in on this, and I'm sure they're chiming into him too. The nation's pharmaceutical lobby, which represents the top U.S. drug makers, immediately pushed back against Trump's order, calling it a, quote, bad deal for American patients because they've been giving us good deals. Drug makers have long argued that any threats to their profits could impact the research they do to develop new drugs. By the way, you and I, taxpayers, we actually contribute a lot of money for that research too. Importing foreign prices from socialist countries would be a bad deal for American patients and workers, Stephen J. Ubel, the president and CEO of Firma, said in a statement. It would mean less treatments and cures and would jeopardize the hundreds of billions our member companies are planning to invest in America. The battered husband looks to the battered wife and says, you're going to divorce me? You're going to leave? I was going to take you on that trip to Tahiti. But if you're going to leave, I'm not going to do that. Incidentally, here's how you know that Senator Sanders is right. He's not predicting the future, and he's not a legal scholar. He knows recent history. Back to the Associated Press. Trump signed a similar executive order in the final weeks of his presidency, which called for the U.S. to only pay lower prices that other countries pay for some drugs, such as injectables or cancer drugs given through infusions administered in a doctor's office. That narrow executive order faced hurdles with a court order that blocked the rule from going into effect under President Joe Biden's administration. I'm sure Biden would have loved for that to have happened, right? The pharmaceutical industry argued that Trump's 2020 attempt would give foreign governments the, quote, upper hand in deciding the value of medicines in the U.S. The concept also remains unpopular with many in his own party. There we go. This is where Sanders' legislation is going to face problems. Senate Majority Leader John Thune from South Dakota noted to reporters on Monday that, quote, it would be, quote, fairly controversial if Trump had tried to push through the policy legislatively rather than via an executive order. So, yeah, we're all really excited about this news. Oh, prescription drug prices are going down 30 to 80%. Some of them, perhaps, but also likely not. And the court's going to say that. And then the legislation's going to go nowhere. And this blip on the radar, this great day that Donald Trump has had, the big announcement from yesterday, will become but a footnote in his second term that got nothing accomplished for we the people. Back after this. More on the president's fantastic day when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. You can follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms at Ron Show ATL, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, Substack, Blue Sky. We're all over that. You can also call the show 404-919-2725. More from Jon Stewart and The Daily Show yesterday.
It feels like a decade ago that they threatened to suspend habeas corpus.
True story.
It was Friday. That long ago yesteryear when the Knicks were still up 2-0. And since then, we've had the largest bribe ever given to an American president, the seeming surrender of a trade war we started.
We'll dive into
and
that.
The socializing of our pharmaceutical industry.
Which is exactly what it sounds like, right?
It is this country. And what operating... 4 months ago, we were a standard issue democratic constitutional republic. Now we're some kind of anarcho, klepto, socialist, communist Silk Road reality show. The only foundational unchanging edict that we can even hang our hats on anymore is that whatever we are now as a country, that country is closed to any refugees. As Stephen Miller said, America is now for Americans only.
Well...
So hopefully there will be no more surprise announcements that overturn that apple cart.
After pausing virtually all refugee admissions for those fleeing war and famine, the Trump administration is now planning to welcome one group, white South Africans.
What the f***?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
White South Africans? That's the only group we're opening? What? You already have one. What?
Elon.
You know what, Mr. President? You don't need 30, 37 South Africans. Now you'll make do with just one or two.
Okay.
Wait, this wouldn't have anything to do with the white thing, would it?
Their land is being confiscated in South Africa. I don't care about their race, their color. I don't care about their height, their weight.
And that's a callback, by the way.
Oh, you care about their weight.
Yeah, because as I mentioned earlier, the whole lead up to the prescription drug thing, Donald Trump, through his successful businessman, neurotic, and morbidly obese, right? That's the story, the anecdote anyway, that his friend went overseas, saw that Ozempic was dirt cheap there, and wondered why it was so expensive back in the U.S., and Donald Trump was then outraged. I mean, again, we know that he tried to do this in the closing weeks of his first presidency, and the courts said no. Senator Sanders stepped up yesterday immediately and released a statement saying, I agree with what you want to do, but you know full well it's going to be thrown out in the courts. Therefore, I'm going to introduce legislation that'll do the same thing, and when it passes in a bipartisan fashion in the House and Senate, then you can sign it into law with your smudgy Sharpie marker signature, Mr. President. That's a pretty good Bernie Sanders. Anyway, we know that's not going to happen. So again, part of what really made yesterday a really good day for President Trump is just throw that away. That's cannot happen. I have reached out to, and we will speak to at some point in time, Kate Lincoln Goldfinch with the Lincoln Goldfinch Immigration Law Firm in Austin, Texas, where our Atlanta United will be playing Wednesday night. First pitch at 9:30, I believe. I'm sorry, kick. I say pitch because that's what they play on the pitch. So anyway, we'll talk with her about that and habeas corpus, what that all means, and suspending habeas corpus. Harkening back to Abraham Lincoln suspending habeas corpus because we're at war, and why these white, and it's 59, not 36, 37, John, why these 59 South African refugees plight is different than the plight of refugees who are usually pigmented differently than the president. Well, we're all pigmented differently than the president, at least after the tan, the spray tan. What are they doing when they do that to him, by the way? It's like they put the cone of shame around the base of his neck and then diagonally up to his hairline. That is the most ridiculous looking. Stop. I mean, we see that. Like, you see that, right? We all see that. That's ridiculous. Does the man not have friends? Like, somebody at some point in time pulls you aside as a friend and says, dude, this spray tan you're getting, it looks ridiculous. Then again, the hair and the same suit every day and the oversight. I said that when Nancy Mace yesterday on social media posted a photo of herself before she was going to go on, I think, Fox News, and the hair didn't look good. The dress looked like a linoleum pattern from the 1970s. I kid you not. And I immediately, I said, she has no gay friends. None, because somebody would have done something with the hair better than meh. And somebody would have pulled her to the side and said, Nancy, ma'am, did your kid buy you this dress? Do you have to wear it? Your mother-in-law, somebody give you this and you tacitly promised, okay, I'll wear this on my next TV appearance. Oh God, I've got to wear this on my next TV appearance. It is a sight to behold. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, the pigment of the South African refugees. They're white. And suddenly we have empathy. We have all this empathy for people who have been, allegedly anyway, wronged by their country, run by black South Africans now, the majority we call them. And so they sought refugee status, could have sought asylum somewhere closer to them, right? That's the rule that we have for our brown-skinned neighbors in South and Central America. We'll just go to your nearest, neighboring country to seek asylum instead of coming all the way here. I believe that there are a few countries between here and South Africa, and a huge body of water, by the way. Two, actually. Okay. There's a lot that keeps South Africans from just arriving here when there are neighboring countries that they could seek refugee status at, but just won't for some reason. And so this sudden hardline policy nation that has no room, no empathy for the plight of the Haitian, the Afghan. My God, the Afghans are being completely wronged after aiding us in 2 decades of war in their home country and being sent back essentially to their death in Afghanistan. Thank you. And that, that's the sort of soft diplomacy that the Trump administration now employs, which means that our intelligence agencies, our military, in future endeavors will have a hell of a hard time convincing potential assets like this to help us again. These are the sort of things that don't pay off in the long run. Just interesting, right? More to dive into the president's fantastic day when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio.
This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
So the president's really, really, really good day yesterday. We've already set aside the quizzical South African refugee thing. It's not about white people, but it sure seems that there's something different about those 59 refugees and the rest that are being denied any hearing, any opportunity to seek asylum. The Remain in Mexico program, that's for we're not remaining South African farmers in Mexico, for example. We're not threatening to send them to Libya either. You've heard about that, right? Libya or Gitmo. None of that. So anyway, the president yesterday, happy to, we also dived into the prescription drug thing. That's a big nothing burger. Senator, oh God, I wish. Senator Bernie Sanders calling his bluff on that. I will introduce legislation to make sure that this is codified into law so that the courts can't overturn it. Good luck with that, Senator Sanders, because bipartisanship, anyway, so the big trade tariff deal, the president, Donald Trump, announcing that we're scaling back tariffs on Chinese goods, and they're going to scale back tariffs on American-made goods, and the trade war is over. Kevin O'Leary last week tonight, that would be John Oliver, on CNN last night, I should say, with Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Keep going, but China is a special situation. When we get that deal done, it'll become the hallmark for all the other countries. And I think where we're going is a 10 and 10 reciprocal on everybody. Call it a VAT tax. That's really what's going on here. Consumption tax in America.
We pay that.
But you can't sell that to Congress, so you call it a tariff.
Also on the show, Congressman Seth Moulton, who really defines this for what it is.
I mean, I don't think that Trump gets a lot of credit for cleaning up his own mess.
Yes.
My 4-year-old gets credit if she cleans up her own mess, but the president, not so much. What are we actually getting here? Donald Trump is weak on China, is the bottom line. He's weak on China. He's been weak on China for a long time.
Yeah, we seem to forget that his first presidency, we were faced with tariffs as well, and we're paying the price wherever we were buying goods that came from China then too. And, oh, by the way, because he was trying to play nice with China and also had our pandemic response unit dismantled, meaning our eye was off the ball there. Something called the coronavirus, COVID-19, sprung forth. I'm just trying to loosely connect dots here, but... And then Natasha Sarin, a Yale law professor, also weighing in last night on a Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Let's just start with some numbers about where we are today relative to where we were on Friday. So today we have effective tariff rates in this country. The budget lab at Yale that I ran the numbers of 17% inclusive of this deal. When President Trump took office in January, effective tariff rates were 2.5%. Kevin's right. These are consumption taxes. They're going to be borne by low and middle income people who are going to see prices increase by on average $2,800 price increases for a family as a result of these tariffs that are in place. And 30% tariffs on China are lower than 145%, but they are still extremely, extremely high. And they are high on literally everything that the American people buy. So I think that if this is the framework for how we expect these trade deals to go going forward, I think we're in a place where things aren't actually going that well from the perspective of a trade war that we've launched. Though I want to agree with Scott, I think we actually have to give give Secretary Bessent a fair bit of credit because he understood that we were in a position that was fundamentally untenable, and he started the process of trying to retreat. But it's a mistake to say that the administration has gotten anything from that retreat.
Incidentally, what I think she's saying is Scott Bessent deserves a lot of credit for having to work in the situation that he didn't create, but that his boss did, and he's got to save face. You know, the face that gets the spray tan that I was... anyway. Anna Swanson, Alan Rappaport with the New York Times weighing in on the China tariff trade deal. The headline, Tariff Truce with China demonstrates the limits of Trump's aggression. President Trump's triple-digit tariffs on Chinese products disrupted global trade, but haven't appeared to result in major concessions from Beijing. They write, President Trump's decision to impose and then walk back triple-digit tariffs on Chinese products over the past month demonstrated the power and global reach of U.S. trade policy, the ability to destroy it. But it is also another illustration of the limitations of Mr. Trump's aggressive approach. The tariffs on Chinese goods, which the United States ratcheted up to a minimum of 145% in early April, brought much trade between the countries to a standstill. They caused companies to reroute business globally, importing less from China and more from other countries like Vietnam and Mexico. What? They didn't just immediately create manufacturing in the U.S.? No, that takes 10 plus years. They continue, they forced Chinese factories to shutter and brought some American importers to the verge of bankruptcy. And by the way, a lot of small businesses suffered in the interim too, by the way. The tariffs ultimately proved too painful to American businesses for Mr. Trump to sustain. Within weeks, Trump officials were saying that the tariffs the president had chosen to impose on one of America's largest trading partners were unsustainable and that they were angling to reduce them. A problem he created that his people were tasked with solving. That's where Scott Bessent deserves some credit. Cleaning up his boss's mess while also trying to save that face that's being spray tanned with the line down the... Back to the New York Times. Trade talks between the world's largest economies in Geneva this weekend concluded with an agreement to reduce stiff levies on each other's products by more than many analysts had anticipated. Chinese imports will face a minimum tax of 30%, down from 145%. China will lower its import duty on American goods to 10%, from 125%. The two countries also agreed to hold talks to stabilize the relationship. It remains to be seen what agreements can be reached in future negotiations, but the talks this weekend, according to the New York Times, and the tariff chaos of the past month did not appear to generate any other immediate concessions from the Chinese other than a commitment to keep talking. That has called into question whether the trade disruptions of the past month, which led many American businesses to cancel orders for Chinese imports, freeze expansion plans, and warn of higher prices, were worth it. This quote, the Geneva Agreement represents an almost complete U.S. retreat that vindicates Xi's decisions to forcefully retaliate, according to Scott Kennedy, a China expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, referring to Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader. Although Mr. Trump and his advisors contend that the United States holds the strongest cards in trade negotiations, the president's acquiescence revealed some of the limitations of his hand. Through his so-called reciprocal tariffs and maximalist levies on China, the, quote, art of the deal president, wow, man, these guys are snarkier than I am, is employing a strategy that involves manufacturing trade crises in hopes of extracting quick economic concessions. But when confronting an economic power with similar might and perhaps more willingness to endure pain, I mean, we know that China is willing to let their people endure more pain than we and our elected officials are willing to hear. In other words, because we still live in a country where we think we get to vote on our candidates for office in 2026 and 2028, politicians tend to react to consumer sentiment. Okay, Mr. Trump opted to stand down, declaring China's agreement to join him at the negotiating table a win. On the U.S. side, according to the New York Times, officials essentially said they had determined that they did not want or intend to go down the path that the president's tariffs had set the United States on, of fully decoupling its economy from China. It's impossible. We concluded that we have a shared interest, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said at a news conference in Geneva. The consensus from both delegations is that neither side wanted a decoupling. That language was a stark change from Mr. Bessent's earlier proclamation that the trade war would be much worse for China given its reliance on exports to the United States, when he said they have the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world. He said that on Fox Business Network just last month, and he says, and I can tell you that this escalation is a loser for them. Back to the New York Times, the tariffs proved painful for China, but they were also disruptive for the U.S. economy. American companies had started to warn of coming pain for consumers in the form of higher prices and less availability of products. We have seen that, by the way, at the ports, the terminals. Not much work going on there of late. U.S. manufacturers were particularly concerned about China's export restrictions on vital minerals and magnets. And while shipments from China to the United States plunged 21% in April from a year earlier, its exports to Southeastern Asia countries surged 21%, suggesting it was finding some other channels to continue feeding its export machine. The decision to temporarily lower tariffs on China provides a welcome reprieve for businesses, but it will also do little to ease longer-run uncertainty that is weighing on U.S. firms. That's because of the 90-day thing. Yeah, this is a 90-day agreement. The next line. The two governments now have until mid-August to make progress towards a trade deal. So we get to watch this possibly or not possibly unfold for the next 90 days with us all holding our breath that this gets worked out, because by mid-August, kids are back in school. And what are families and consumers thinking about? Fa la 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 la, $2 instead of 37. On Monday morning, Mr. Trump said that if the countries did not reach an agreement in that time, tariffs on Chinese products would rise again to be substantially higher, though not to 145%, he said. So maybe $7 instead of 37? At 145, you're really decoupling because nobody's going to buy, he added. Retailers and other importers expressed relief that more trade would again be able to flow between the countries, but they were crossing their fingers that the reprieve would last longer than 90 days. Matthew Shea, the chief executive at the National Retail Federation, which represents large and small retailers, called the temporary pause, quote, a critical first step to provide some short-term relief for retailers and other businesses that are in the midst of ordering merchandise for their winter holiday season. And what is this going to do for hiring, by the way? What is this going to do for retail hiring, for distribution hiring, for those folks working at the ports to offload the stuff? That's a valid question that I guess we'll get to at some point in time. Gene Soroka, the chief executive director at the Port of Los Angeles, said on Monday that the 30% tariff that remained on China was still substantial, and that the enthusiasm of American consumers and the companies that relied on their shopping habits had been damaged by the threat of tariffs. 90 days is also a relatively brief time frame, he says, for companies to try to restart stopped shipments from China. He said, given how long it can take to book space on ocean liners and move the products by sea, saying this still is kind of uncharted territory, so we'll see how people respond. But I don't think, based on consumer sentiment, consumer confidence, people are willing to jump in right away and say, okay, this is really great, let's get going. Quick break. Back after this, let me catch a little breath of water here when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. Final segment of the Ron Show, and again, as it pains me to say this, as I did at the start of the show, yesterday was a really good day for President Donald Trump, right? The China trade deal, which we're disseminating now. The pharmaceutical executive order that will be a nothing burger because the courts are going to say that, as they did back when he tried this in the late hours of his first presidency. Because, again, the Biden administration was like, okay, we'll leave that alone. That sounds great. We've been pushing for that for a long time. And getting pushback from the pharmaceutical industry and Republicans beholden to them for quite a while. And the courts did exactly what Senator Sanders recalled them doing. They blocked it. And that's why Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, says, I'll draft the legislation that says exactly what you want to do, Mr. President. And hopefully your Republican colleagues will join me and my Democratic colleagues, and we'll pass this bipartisan legislation. You can sign it into law. Then it's lasting. I mean, an executive order that has no teeth is just a piece of paper with a smudgy signature on it. But again, it's all about optics, right? The tariff deal looks optically great, except we're still going to pay 30% higher tariffs on goods. And by the way, we had tariffs on goods before this trade war too. They weren't as high as they wound up being. So we're going to pay more. Okay, the prescription drug deal looks good optically to those who don't dive into the mechanics of it or the ramifications or the legalities. It just he had a good looking day optically. I didn't check the spray tan. Yeah, optically it looked good. Oh my gosh, look, he's welcoming in refugees. Wait, they're white. But he's welcoming in refugees. Okay, devil's in the details, right? Pharmaceutical deal, empathy for refugees. Wow, I mean, this is just a wholesome change, right? He got the $400 million plane from Qatar. The Trojan. By the way, they're going to have to, I saw this on the news, they're going to have to take that plane apart. Literally, completely apart. What good is a $400 million plane if you've got to take it completely apart to look for listening devices? Because that's a national security threat, right? How do you just trust that there is going to be this, look, we are giving you this plane. It's like the Trojan horse at the gates, right? Of Sparta. We're giving you this. You can have this. Well, what's in it? Nothing. So he got a $400 million. I mean, he had a great day yesterday. He got to sign his executive order for the pharmaceutical industry. He got to tout the trade deal with China, ending the trade war that he started. And he got to welcome refugees, and he got his $400 million plane that somebody's got to take apart and check for listening devices, and not him. But back to the trade deal, because the ramifications are still to be felt. Like I'm about to launch a small business. I'll dive into that at some point in time later on. I'm about to start a small business. Been working on this for a few weeks, and we're soon to go live here in a matter of days, if not weeks. And it has nothing to do with Chinese imports, but it has everything to do with the economy, or as any business does, right? Or what the economy is going to look like in the near future. And so I'm pretty nervous about this. And if I'm nervous about this, then folks who depend on retail are super nervous about this on-again, off-again trade stuff. And now it's another 90 days where you get to hold your breath. Back to the New York Times piece that I was discussing the trade agreement on. Trade experts warn that 90 days was also a very brief window to make substantial progress on the long list of trade spats between the United States and China, including Beijing's ballooning trade surplus. Wendy Cutler, the vice president of the Asia Society Policy Institute, said 3 months was an extremely short amount of time to address the range of contentious trade matters that remain between the U.S. and China, including dealing with excess manufacturing capacity, excessive subsidization of Chinese firms, and transshipment efforts by Chinese companies. Boy, this all sounds like just fun stuff, right? I mean, don't you want to crack a book on that? Similar negotiations typically take well over 1 year, she added. Wah, wah. Mr. Trump has said talks would be focused on, in part, on, quote, opening up China to American businesses. Officials said they had agreed to set up a regular cadence of talks with China and suggested that some of those could center on Chinese purchases of U.S. products that would help balance trade. But we have to make stuff. We don't make a lot of stuff. It is not clear what might differentiate these efforts from past negotiations with China. The New York Times writes, Trump officials have criticized the kind of recurring low-level dialogues that past U.S. administrations held with the Chinese as essentially a waste of time. Chinese officials also agreed to significant purchases in a 2020 trade deal signed with Trump that were meant to help balance trade between the countries, but they ultimately did not fulfill them. Still, the Trump administration now appears intent on reviving that deal. In an interview on CNBC on Monday, Bessent said the 2020 deal could serve as a, quote, starting point for future talks, and blamed the Biden administration for failing to enforce the agreement. Of course, it's always someone else's fault. It's like the Canadian tariffs that the president complained about. Who set these? These were terrible. Who made these deals? He made that deal in his first term. During his confirmation hearing, Scott Bessent said he intended to push China to honor its commitments to purchase more American farm products. While the Trump administration has said broadly that it wants China to lower its non-tariff trade barriers and open up its market to American firms, the latest trade clash could result in the revival of Trump's old trade deal. Everyone thought in advance that the most important thing is to get Chinese adherence to the 2020 Phase 1 agreement that for many issues provides a foundation for going forward, said Mike Pillsbury, who was a top China advisor to Mr. Trump in his first term. Other analysts said the Trump administration would most likely continue to push China to stem the flow of fentanyl precursors to the United States and try to make progress in other trade issues, like China's vast subsidization and dominance of certain industries. The two governments have given themselves a window to get something done on fentanyl and purchases. That's Myron Brilliant, a senior counselor at DGA Albright Stonebridge Group, who throws a hell of a Christmas party, by the way. I'm kidding. Who advises clients on China. But what else will China agree to remains a big question going forward, given our longstanding persistent concerns over their trade policies. Again, Anna Swanson and Alan Rappaport contributing together in tandem on that piece that covers the really good day that President Donald John Trump had yesterday with regards to China's trade situation. See, you thought when I started this show talking about how fantastic a day it was, the last 24 hours, for President Donald J. Trump, that this was going to be an unlistenable show, right? Come on. You know me better. Come on. One little local story that I found pretty interesting. You know, I talk mass transit a lot. Sarah Gregory at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporting that MARTA, the Metro Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, has decided to change one of their MARTA station names. And this is long overdue, okay? Because it had been called the station that served CNN. Oh, okay, it was the Georgia Dome, Georgia World Congress Center, Phillips Arena, CNN Center, MARTA station. Okay, the Georgia Dome's gone. The GWCC, nobody knows what that means. Phillips Arena is now State Farm Arena. And CNN Center no longer exists. So, you know, really a long, cumbersome name that had no impact on modern times, right? Goodbye, she writes, Dome, GWCC, Phillips Arena, CNN Center, MARTA Station. It was really a stupid name to begin with. The name they chose, which, by the way, was a hastened process. It's not a good name. It's still... It still has a very bland and goofy and actually odd name to it if you're an ACC football or basketball or sports fanatic. And by the way, Georgia Tech in Atlanta is in the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference. This is called the SEC station now, not for the Southeastern Conference, where the University of Georgia plays its athletics in. No, it's the Sports Entertainment and Convention District. Oh, hey, baby. Dooley says hi. So now they're slapping up signs for that station to be called the Sports Entertainment and Convention District. She writes, more than 7 years after the Georgia Dome imploded and long after Phillips Arena and the CNN Center changed names, MARTA's renaming the downtown station. The outdated station name is a navigational headache for visitors and has been a concern for those planning next year's World Cup matches, all of which will be played next door to the station at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So on Thursday, MARTA's board of directors voted to change the name in time for the FIFA game and the 300,000 visitors expected to descend on Atlanta. The World Cup deadline added urgency to the name change, MARTA board member Thomas Worthy said. This is kind of an emergency. Take action before we run out of time situation, Worthy said. It's been on people's minds for quite some time, but we're kind of getting close to the event horizon. Just letting you know, if you're coming to Atlanta in the near future and you've always had to navigate, what the hell is this Dome Guac Phillips Arena CNN thing? It's gone. It's now the Sports Entertainment Convention District. Very generic name for the area where the MARTA station will be stopping beneath State Farm Arena and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They could have called it the Arena Stadium Stop. I don't know. That just... Oh, you don't want to go with the ass stop? Now I get it. Okay, SEC it is. The station renaming is happening quickly and outside of the board's usual process, the AJC reports. Typically, public meetings are held and community input is sought. Because I'm sure if we had had community input sought on that, they would have shot down my ass station idea from the jump, because it wouldn't have been a good moniker either. So we'll go with SEC. In this case, the AJC writes the Metro Atlanta Chamber worked with MARTA and a bevy of other organizations, the Atlanta Sports Council, Arthur Blank, Sports and Entertainment Organization, the Atlanta Falcons, Atlanta United, the Atlanta Hawks, State Farm Arena, and the Georgia World Congress Center Authority. Boy, that would have been a lot to put on a sign, right? To secure support for the name change. And now you know if you're coming to Atlanta for FIFA World Cup. That's going to do it for today's Ron Show. This show airs 9 a.m., 5 p.m. weekdays on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Show notes, as always, at RonShowATL.com. Have yourselves a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.